Good evening, good morning, good afternoon. Steve, I've got a poem.
Really? That's
Yeah,
exciting.
man.
You do
I
that
was
so rarely.
yeah, I was gonna bring Frost, but I've decided not to bring Frost, and instead I'm bringing William Butler Yeats.
Yates!
Hey, that's a good one. Yeah, that
I
that
don't know.
pun will definitely make it through the editing process. Uh, okay, good deal. So this one. I brought this one in particular today because Yeats has something for us toward the end of the poem that I want to explore. I want this in particular to be our sort of jumping off point for the conversation that we have today. So, this poem is entitled Adam's Curse. And
Oh, a cheery poem. Great.
yeah, something really not, well, not cheery, but it does end in a nice. You'll see. Okay.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. Let's hear it. Adam's Curse by William Butler Yeats. We sat together at one summer's end, that beautiful, mild woman, your close friend, and you and I, and talked of poetry. I said, a line will take us hours, maybe, yet if it does not seem a moment's thought, our stitching and unstitching has been naught. Better go down upon your marrow bones and scrub a kitchen pavement, or break stones like an old pauper in all kinds of weather. For to articulate sweet sounds together is to work harder than all these, and yet be thought an idler by the noisy set of bankers, schoolmasters, and clergymen, the martyrs call the world. And thereupon that beautiful mild woman, for whose sake there's many a one shall find out all heartache on finding that her voice is sweet and low, replied, to be born woman is to know, although they do not talk of it at school, that we must labor to be beautiful. I said, it's certain there is no fine thing since Adam's fall, but needs much laboring. There have been lovers who thought love should be so much compounded of high courtesy that they would sigh and quote with learned looks precedents out of beautiful old books. Yet now it seems an idle trade enough. We sat grown quiet at the name of love. We saw the last embers of daylight die, and in the trembling blue-green of the sky, a moon, worn as if it had been a shell, washed by time's waters as they rose and fell about the stars and broke in days and years. I had a thought for no one's but your ears, that you were beautiful, and that I strove to love you in the old high way of love, that it had all seemed happy, and yet we'd grown as weary-hearted as that hollow moon.
So, do you think that the three of them, that their conversation is contained in that first section? That that's all they said, and then they just fell to quietness for a lengthy period of time, thinking about it and watching the last embers of the daylight and so on? Is that how you interpret this? That this is a long period of time with very few words spoken, or do you think that he's doing something else there?
I am interested at the possibility of it being something else because for me, I read it and it's a pretty formal, pretty sort of rigid structure at the beginning where there is a lot of dialogue. And yeah, I don't know. I put a lot of weight in that grown quiet. I do think, we saw the last embers of daylight die. That takes a little time to see that. And so then he has
Yeah,
a
just
thought for no one but his lover's ears, right?
yeah, yeah.
What about are
Well,
you thinking something
we
else?
had grown quiet at the name of
Yeah.
love. Like when that comes out there, it almost blows apart the
Yes,
conversation.
exactly. Okay, sweet. This is where I'm headed. That I don't know, like this line in particular is what I want to talk about sort of in the classroom. This blowing apart the conversation, or this something happens in this line, right?
Yeah, right, exactly. This is a
Yeah.
unexpected moment.
That's right. And up to this point, oh yeah, we're talking about poetry, and we're talking about how to write it. We're talking about what it takes to be beautiful,
Yeah.
and you're almost, the dialogue is sufficient to make you think, like, how can I say, it's artful enough, and it is potent enough that you would be excused for believing that it's going to continue for a long time. But it doesn't, right? All of a sudden, love, and they're quiet, right? They
Well, right. I can go on at length about the writing of poetry or the nature of Adam's curse, even.
hmm hmm hmm
But when you drop into the midst of us love, well, who can fathom that?
yeah, yeah,
You've just you've just put something in there much bigger than what we were playing with.
uh-huh, uh-huh,
And it's not that it, when I say blows apart, I don't mean ends. It's almost like it becomes too big to talk about rather than, well, we don't have anything left to say. We don't know where to begin.
right.
And for the writer, I start thinking things that I don't want to say in front of the third party. you know,
Sure.
I, these are from my lover's ears only.
hmm
Uh, Now that you've got me thinking about that kind of stuff.
hmm
So what's this look like in the classroom? What do you have a plan here? What is it?
Yeah, well, my plan is a question, a lot more than a format or a layout, um, because when I think of this poem and I think about the classroom, there's a lot of overlap, right? Like this this moment, we sat grown quiet at the name of love. That's happened in the class before, right? Where a room full of rambunctious people, we're we're playing it fast and loose. We're having a lot of fun. We're talking fast. We're talking over each other at times, like there's a lot happening, and then it changes. And all of a sudden we slow down and get very introspective. Um, Surely there's times where we slow down, and that's just a result of there's a lag, right? Like we're kind of done,
Right,
we're kind
right,
of out. That's not what I mean at all. There's a different slowing down where it's almost a catching up, or a realizing, oh, wait a minute, we were just at the tip of the iceberg here, right? Like there's the scope is totally our scope is totally off, right? Like there's way more than we recognized we were dealing with.
right, right.
And that's a really
Which
beautiful
which end of
moment.
the telescope are we supposed to look through?
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah. We get this thing turned around, and suddenly we see way more than we thought we were seeing.
Exactly.
It's almost like, I don't know, the truth has snuck into the room.
Yeah, right.
We were just going about our business learning, and then this pesky thing snuck in and bit us.
Yeah,
It's like, wait, where did that come from?
right, right.
And
Well,
it does happen. And the mystical thing to me is that there's no way to make this happen.
right. Although, man, if you could bottle and sell it, you'd be rich,
Oh,
right? Like
yes.
I
Talk about
I
teachers paying teachers. That baby right there
yeah,
would be
right. For
put that
sure.
one as a hot seller. Yeah.
And the thing is, like, you're right, I think that there's no way to just make it happen. Um, I certainly haven't found a way, but I do want to talk with you about what maybe we can fish out some ways, some practices or some postures or something that perhaps leaves, if we can't drag truth into the room, right? To pick up on your metaphor of truth sneaking in the door, is there a way that we can leave the door cracked?
Right, prepare, not knowing when the moment might happen.
Right. Leave a seat empty.
Yes, correct.
Right.
That's a good analogy. And I
I
think there's a
I
bunch of
want to
ways.
talk about that. Yeah, okay, good. I before those, I want to talk about that and we'll see kind of where it happens. But another thing I'm interested in is um, because I'm thinking in particular of times in my teaching experience where truth sneaks in and I get so excited I chase him out.
Yeah, yeah,
Right. Like I draw so much attention to what's happening that I kill it.
yeah. You've
Right.
well,
uh
it gets off the hook. You've just described most of my fishing experiences. Right. I
okay.
land the little ones, but the big ones
Right.
all get away because I try too hard.
Yeah.
I I
Real.
I break the line, or I jerk too quickly and rip it out of its mouth, or
Right.
I do all the wrong
Right.
things because I'm not a great fisherman. I don't do it enough to be good at it.
Right.
But when I first started teaching, I was in middle school, and I was teaching middle schoolers,
Sure.
and which is analogous to being in middle school.
Yeah,
Um,
it's not
and
100% different.
and that's any like moment you pray for it and you watch for it and you hope for it, but your description is perfect. As soon as it's like if you're playing the whack-a-mole game, it's one of those false things where it starts to raise its head and then it goes
Yeah,
it
yeah.
goes back down because you're trying to strike at it too quickly. If you'd
Yeah.
let it come up and look around for a little while and hang out, everybody would see it.
Yeah.
And by everybody, I mean the students would see it, feel
Right.
it, get excited about it. And frankly, you as a teacher wouldn't have to do much to keep it there.
Right.
But it's just like so, oh, there it is. And then it goes, nope, I'm not here. Boop.
Yeah.
It's back down in the hole. You
Right.
scared me, teacher. You're too aggressive here.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Which is totally understandable, right? Like I, especially as a beginning teacher, man, when the students would get excited and when these moments would happen, I just I was so eager to have uh truth present that uh I could not exercise restraint.
yeah.
And that it's such a sort of paradoxical thing. Maybe that's the first thing that I want to notice about it is that initially it so it sort of takes um work or something when you don't expect it to, and then it takes restraint when you
Succeed.
don't want to. Yeah, exactly. Right. When you don't want it to happen. So or when you don't, I guess, want to exercise restraint, that's exactly when you must, or when I must anyway.
Well, and you're talking about something that maybe isn't directly related to this subject per se, but happens in teaching a lot, where one loses or becomes forgetful of who's supposed to be benefiting most from the classroom, right? Um,
Hmm.
in the humanities, we're all humans in the room. So when truth comes in the door and sits down in the corner, and I see him, I get excited in part because I, as a teacher, want that's why I'm teaching. But it's also the human reaction of, hey, this is true for me too, and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I forget the student.
Right.
I become the student again, and
Hmm.
um, I run into this all the time in teaching seminar, and maybe that's one of the first things we suggest about
Yes,
preparation
yes,
is
yes, yes.
the stuff that's the curriculum, the pathway that we follow. with guys like Plato and Augustine and Aquinas, and we're in John Stuart Mill now. We'll be in Camus soon, and Nietzsche.
Uh-huh.
Not necessarily. I mean, there's some strange bedfellows, but they're
Yeah.
all brilliant. Okay, they
Hmm.
get my heart pumping,
Yeah. Right. Right.
and my job in that room is not to have a seminar for me. It is to facilitate having a seminar for them. And
Yes.
they're 17, 18 years of age. And so all of that's implied, the possibility for truth to be in the room, it maybe first is prepared by having the right material.
Hmm.
I think that you can have such banal,
Right.
average, mediocre, someday it's going to happen on the podcast. You're going to show up with a poem that's like, and and then we're going to have to deal with all the editing implied,
Right.
Uh, but so far you haven't, right? Today you show up with a poem that
Yeah.
that inserts the truth we want to talk about in a powerful way and gives us something to work off of. And it's but your caution is absolutely necessary. Um, when I start engaging with Augustine, I forget the 18-year-olds in the room and
Yeah.
just want it to be me and him, and
Uh-huh.
occasionally there's like this little tentative hand that goes up. Mr. Elliott, what are you talking about? And then
Right.
oh, yes, I'm sorry.
Right.
Um,
Well,
and
so okay. What you were saying, sorry, I kind of cut you off. So content, right? Like
yeah,
material is a
I,
huge part.
I hear people say to me all the time, many of the books you want these students reading are over their heads. And I always, I'll often grab them around the shoulder and thank them for that compliment. They
Right.
didn't mean it that way,
Right.
but
Sure.
if it was easy, I think the higher the content, the greater the content, the more challenging
Hmm.
the content, the more
Hmm.
likely those kids at some point in working with it and in defining and in playing with it. I like the busyness you described at the beginning of your classroom, where we're just almost talking over the top of each other. What does it mean? This and whatever. But I think and
Right.
then
Right.
that beautiful moment when often somebody that doesn't tend to say too much goes, well, maybe it's boom, and then everybody
Oh,
just
dude,
goes,
I love it, man. It's so good.
everybody's face just kind of turns towards it. Can you say that again?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's the key for the teacher, is to know that they're playing with dynamite, right?
Hmm.
I'm very
Right.
mindful of that. When here in a few weeks, when we go into Nietzsche, his Beyond Good and Evil, I'm
Hmm.
very aware of the powerfully bad things that book has done in the history of the world.
Oh, totally.
It's dynamite. It's a real gun.
Yeah.
And
That's right.
if I'm not there to help them be careful with it, it can go off. But at
Right.
the same time, I love it when it goes off properly, right?
Sure. Of course.
Because
Of
I don't
course.
I don't think article out of the newspaper is going to go off in the classroom.
Hmm.
At least
Right.
it's
Not
less
the same
likely.
way.
It's
Right.
less likely.
Not this. Yeah, definitely. Like you said, truth is everywhere. And there's a lot of ways of getting at it. And so this question is not an end around for a rigid sort of great books curriculum or whatever, right? Like that's a different conversation. Um, Maybe it does happen with a newspaper article, right? But we're not talking, like we've already said, there's no formula. And so we're just talking about preparing the soil, if you will, cracking the door to allow uh, truth an easy entrance. So content is one. That's not what I thought you were going to say. The first thing you said was seminar, and you went right to content of the material of the books. I thought you were going to say the form of seminar, versus something more like a lecture or small
Yeah.
groups,
Well,
that sort of thing.
the more voices in the room, the more likely truth is going to sneak in. I think it's in that, the old cliche sort of thing about the method of science or
Okay.
mathematics, that
Right.
the real learning occurs when you're wrong,
Mm-hmm.
right? That the
Mm-hmm.
vast majority of what's happening, say in a science classroom, is a kid thinking, well, if I do this, this, and this will happen. So they do this, this, and this, and wait a minute, well, why didn't that work?
Right.
If they did this, this, and this, and what they expected happened, they go, oh, well, I see, I already knew that, and move on. It's
Right.
when it messes up, and so I when you've got several minds, especially several young minds, trying to figure it out, there's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of mistakes being made, right? But that
Yeah.
gap, that's where sparks start happening, and people go, well, maybe it's,
Right.
well, no,
Right.
it's not that. Well, but
What?
maybe, well, that could be it. What about, and so then there's this variety of speculation, as opposed to, like you were saying, a
Mm-hmm.
lecture is basically, this is the way it is.
Yeah.
And my students
Right.
seem very reticent. High school students don't seem happy to sit and just go, well, gee, Mr. Elliott, you're so smart. Of course you're right. The hand goes up in
Sure.
the air. Hey, what about, are you
Yeah.
saying, or do you
Which is
have,
a great question. Well, what about? Like
yes,
that might be our best bet in terms of in like getting at a question that's going to spark something, right? That's going to welcome truth in. Well, what about this? Like, huh? Like yeah, that's often been what gets the party started.
which is often resisted by the lecturer. Maybe this is
Yes.
another thing, what not to do, what will
Hmm.
keep
Hmm.
truth out of the room is
Yeah.
such a rigid, I've got this plan, I've got this outline, I've got this PowerPoint, I've got this lesson,
Hmm.
and your question's getting in the way of it. No.
Yeah. Right. Right. Right.
your that question has lit a fuse on the dynamite.
Hmm.
Let it blow,
Yeah.
dude. But
Yeah.
time is a big deal here, and I think that was implied in what you'd say. It's implied in your poem,
Yes.
is that there was enough time for them to slow down,
Hmm.
and that's the rushed nature is. We talked about Pieper's
Leisure
leisure, the
as the
basis of
basis of
culture.
culture. Yeah.
And that's a big distinction. Leisure demands almost wasteful amounts of time.
Hmm.
Work is all efficient. Let's get it done. We got 8 hours today. We're going to get X, Y, and Z done. If we don't, the boss is going to kick our rear end.
Hmm.
Leisure can't think in that term because of the mystical nature of it.
Right.
Because you don't know when the bomb's going to go off. You don't know how long the fuse is. You're waiting.
Right.
You're continuing to seek and talk and maybe even allow that. It's funny to me how many teachers behave like they're on air, and the dead
What do you
space.
mean? Like like an oxygen tank or something?
No, like on the radio, and
Oh,
and
okay.
and
Okay.
silence,
Oh, like they're on a podcast.
or like they're on a podcast, right? So we go through and we edit out all of the long pauses where
Right.
you know Jason says, "Well, you going to say anything?" Well, no, I was waiting for you to say something. Oh, well, that's a behind the scenes look at the podcast.
Right.
But in the classroom, many teachers they can't stand silence,
Mm.
and our students don't know how to handle silence.
Yeah.
It's such a noisy world, and they've got, mine are bugging me all the time to put their earbuds in. I just don't allow it. But
Hmm.
but they want the background music, or they want the YouTube video, or they want stimulation, stimulation, stimulation. So I'm like,
Hmm.
stop,
Hmm.
breathe.
That's hard though. I mean, like I agree with you. I'm sympathetic to your perspective. Like I share your perspective. Um it's just a tough sell these days, right?
Yes, I think there's a
When
guilt
there's
to
so
it.
much. Yeah.
They almost feel like, but this is school. We've got and we've talked about the fear factor before, but it's very prevalent in this regard.
Yep.
That if I spend a whole hour on a comment some student made,
Right.
well, now we're behind.
Uh,
Why do you
yeah.
interpret it that way? How do you know that we just leapfrogged over a lot of stuff I don't have to lecture about now because we figured it out together through that brilliant question that so and so asked?
hmm Yeah. That's I agree. So that's another way, right, to sort of allow space. Silence is awkward. Man, it's awkward initially, but once a crew has been together for a while, it doesn't have to be. I have a good buddy who, when I was in college, this just came to my mind actually. Bryce Flynn. I don't know if you're out there listening, but if you are, this one is from you. Bryce and I were talking, and the way that what he said was the way that if somebody is a good friend is if you're driving in the car with them and you don't feel like you have to say something.
Yep.
So that if what I'm saying is in the classroom initially, yeah, first day, I'm sure it would be uncomfortable to just sit there for 5 minutes in silence. But as the group progresses and as they cohere to one another, you start to have a lot more room for that, a lot more room, and it's even welcome, right? It becomes a very nice, a very restful thing.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of aspects to that. One is there's got to be room and time and space and safety for the quote unquote bomb to go off.
Mm-hmm.
But once it goes off, the incubation
Yeah. Yeah.
for the rest of us to catch up with what just happened.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. I'm
Right.
glad. I'm glad we're here because this is once the miraculous has broken in, right? Like once the epiphany hits, that like I've already said, the temptation is to jump all over it. Um,
Right.
well, how do you not? Right? That's the question. How do you just let it settle? Right?
Well, so perception is a big deal.
Okay.
If you don't realize it's happened, you're not going to do anything about it.
Absolutely. You might trounce right over it and not even realize that anything
And
happened.
a couple hours later, after they've left the room, you're kicking yourself, going, "Oh man!"
Yeah.
And that happens. I mean, it's even an experienced person's going to miss some of it. But
Yeah.
but so what's desperately needed in our classrooms today, and in any period in time, what a teacher above all else is, I think, is a judge, right? Somebody with the
Okay.
wisdom to discern
Uh-huh.
that just happened. Look,
Okay.
look, and um, and then have, I don't know if the word plan is right, but have some things already decided that there's going to be a pause,
Yeah.
and that the most important aspects of dealing with the truth that's come in is probably the questions that are asked rather than the answers that are given.
Uh-huh.
It's presented itself as an answer,
Okay.
but it's part of the reason people get nervous about it is because it's not placed. It's come in and sat down, and you don't know what to do with it yet, and it's questions that will get you there.
Uh-huh. 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 Good.
You know what I'm saying?
I do.
So
Yeah.
so
So something happens and all of a sudden it's like, oh, wait a minute. Um, this is really great. I don't know if this is sort of unit 8 or unit 12. Um, and if you try to get at that immediately, if you try to categorize it right off the bat, uh, you might lop its head off.
miscategorize.
Yeah,
Yep.
right,
Or put it in the wrong place,
right.
or call it the wrong thing, or
Uh-huh.
etc.
hmm
And
So
I have
instead,
from
right, go ahead.
I have from time to time recognized that what just walked in is beautiful and wonderful and good, but it's in the wrong place.
Okay.
That we need to deal with a few other things and come back to it.
Okay.
But I'm always nervous about that because I don't want the moment to be lost.
Yeah. I
So it's
confess that I will follow that to a fault. Like if a good conversation breaks in, I will I will abandon what I had going, even if what I had going is important and probably closer to the aims of the course and probably is what I should teach. I'll let it go. And what I'm saying is to a fault. Like that, there are times when I should not, and yet I still do. I guess I'm a sucker for a good
well,
conversation in some ways.
and I hear your confession, but
Yeah.
I think that there's a way to place mark.
Okay.
So this is so to me this is another aspect of making room for these things to happen is um, the self-critical nature, the self-evaluative, the self-assessment that a teacher should go through, and how often they need to go through it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, is there an epiphany? Let's say you're teaching 5 hours of the day. Is there an epiphany 5 times a day? No, probably not.
No, no.
Um, is there an epiphany in a given class, even every week? Well, I would hope so. It's maybe not too far fetched to say maybe once a week truth sneaks in.
Yeah, yeah. That seems
But
like good
so
classes, Yeah.
so I've done two things in my teaching that I think are important. One is if I have one of those moments, what's burning in my mind when the bell rings
Yeah.
is how quickly can I get to a place of self-assessment, evaluate what
Okay.
happened. I'm like you, I will normally go with it rather than try and
Uh-huh.
put it off because
Yeah,
I'm afraid of losing it. It's
that's
a
right.
precious thing. But I'm mindful that if it really is good, then it belongs somewhere in what we're studying,
Okay.
even if it's maybe not even directly related to this year.
Yeah, good. I see where you're going. Yeah, go.
I need so I don't want to lose it, and not losing it doesn't just mean enjoying it to the bell,
Mm-hmm.
but after the bell, deciding what to do with that. Should I make a note to myself that when we finally get to where it would have been
Mm-hmm.
in an outline form appropriate, by all means refer them back to because they'll remember
Dude,
it if
that's
it really went
brilliant.
off. So
I've
so
literally never done that. Like that's worth the price of admission right there. The sort of turning inward and saying, okay, now that it's happened, where where does it need to go and how can I sort of call back to it? Sure, in that class, but also what are the like what was the conversation that gave rise to this important thing, and how
yep.
can I plow that sort of section especially deep, with the sophomores in 3 quarters when we're going to be talking about this thing or whatever.
Right. Well, so that's my second.
Okay, okay, all right, sweet.
I evaluate. Well, no, you're not violating anything here. Um, Personally, I
Hmm.
try to be aware, and then I guess I'll use this term departmentally or with colleagues.
Yeah.
I think one of the most beneficial things is the quote unquote school within the school, right? Which
Yes.
unfortunately is somewhat limited to the 25 minutes they give us to eat lunch together. But I am fortunate to sit there at a table with some other teachers and go, this came up this morning. It's really awesome. And then somebody from another department goes, oh, well, that would fit so well with well, you know, and the funny thing is an English teacher and a theology teacher have lunch together every day.
Okay.
And I will normally let her know, the theology teacher, oh, by the way, we're in Dante, and purgatory is really bothering the Protestants.
Right, sure.
you know, Heads up.
Yeah,
you know, or
right.
the biology teacher today is sitting there, and I had a guest in my seminar who is a medical doctor and working on a really wacky medical ethical problem.
Okay.
And so we got into that in my class, but I
Nice.
wanted the biology teacher to know, hey, by the way, we knocked on your door today.
Uh-huh.
Um, by all means, continue it.
Right.
Um, and I find, especially in the seminar class, which is the great conversation. It's crossing all the curricular. There aren't curricular boundaries, but it's crossing all of the false curricular boundaries.
Right.
And there's just nothing off limits. Math and science and
Hmm.
language and art and everything, philosophy, theology, English. It's just all there.
Yep.
And so the kids often, even without my purposeful doing so, take it with them and bring the bomb back up in another
Hmm.
class where they think it's, or they sometimes it may not be any more appropriate to that class than it is to mine, but they want that teacher's opinion,
Yeah. Great.
right?
Bring it on, right?
Or,
Like
or,
that's
right.
awesome.
And
That's
so then
really good.
there starts to be these sort of, I'll have a student come and say to me, I heard the sophomores are doing thus and so. Are they really do,
Yep.
the words out,
Yep.
the smell of the gunpowder has,
Yep.
from the bomb going off in my class has diffused out into the hallway
Yep.
and through the ventilation system, and other people are going, what happened? And what
Well,
happened third
and
period?
that's probably another indicator, right? That hey, if people start asking around, um, now you had them doing what? Like what? How did you guys get there? That's another sort of, I don't know, I guess indicator that what you had was special. That was a really good moment. Um, okay, I do not have advice or tips or whatever half as good as what you just talked about in terms of not only reflecting and sort of categorizing for future conversations, but also then working with your colleagues and bouncing that off of them and sort of keeping it going that way. But I do think that I want to say this because this has been for me a pretty good thing, and it's really granular, right? Like on the technical level. Okay, so we're in the classroom and truth sneaks in, and I recognize, okay, there it is. Um, I will typically do a couple of things. First of all, well, I've noticed that if you're excited and you ask, like, well, what do you mean? That can crush uh, some of the more timid students, right? Who
Right,
are
right.
often the ones who are bringing this sort of partner along. And so instead, what I've recognized I have done, and what I've tried to be intentional about doing is first, I will sort of give a non-verbal sort of affirmation, or perhaps a verbal affirmation, right? But it's often just hmm, right? Like oh, okay. Um, and then I make sure to request an explanation, right? So, not tell me what you mean or say more, which is that used to be my go
Yeah,
to phrase.
yeah.
I would
Say
say,
more.
say more because I was excited,
Ah!
right? That man, like that, I would always do that. Say more, because I wanted the contribution to continue, right? But I had to stop doing that, and instead, I've sort of said, okay, so please, I make sure to say please, um, you know, please, could you tell us more? Please, do you have more to say there? Uh, and then it's quiet, right? Don't rush it at this point. Um, and it's a lot of times the student is able to take another run at it, right? Like, well, I guess I'm just what I'm after here is this, and they can sort of say it again or say a little more. At this point, I'm probably like scribbling furiously on the board, trying to capture something and get people also capturing it in their notes. But sometimes a student can't say that. Sometimes the student says, "No, I can't really say anymore, Mr. Dolworth. This is it. I just mean this." And at that point, I have had some success in opening it up. Right at that point, then saying, "Okay, well, thank you for your contribution. Others, is there anyone else in the room who can fill in with what we're saying? Who wants to sort of keep us going here? This is a really good thing." And that's
Yeah,
been
and
that's been good.
right. That's a comment I'd make is not so much in the lower grades, but as students get used to the skills necessary to be free,
Hmm.
one of the main ones is listening.
Hmm.
If they've gotten past the hump of ignoring what everybody else is saying because they're trying to think of what they're going to say next,
Right.
if they're actually tuned into the conversation and they've heard it, there's a better than half chance
Hmm.
that they recognize truth just slipped in the door, just like you do.
Hmm.
Certainly, I would think that the teacher is the most experienced censor of truth.
Right.
That's
That's
kind of what you're getting
certainly
paid.
the goal. Right.
I mean, it's a probably,
Yeah.
but more than once, I've missed it, but been aware enough of the reactions of others
Yep.
to realize something was just said that I missed. Um, and often, in I guess coming back to what you're saying, I don't always have to be the one asking for more.
Hmm.
If that initial comment, the kaboom, can often set off a series of sympathetic kabooms, right?
Yep.
If it's depending on the nature of it, I find this especially true with moral issues. If the truth that's just come in has to do with how we ought to behave,
Uh-huh.
almost instantaneously the sides kind of get drawn up. There are people that love it and want to go, well, but that would mean blah 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 blah, and they go on down the road with it. And then
Hmm.
there's always other people with the handbrake going, whoa, 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 you know.
Yeah.
And I've learned just to let them, if necessary. We've talked about this before with the atmosphere of the classroom and whatnot. Um, let them have a little bit of a wreck. Nobody's
Hmm.
going to get too hurt here. Don't
Yeah.
let bad things happen. But a good little mess is not bad.
No.
And then, as necessary, start helping them to clean it up and organize it. And in particular, it seems like well over half the time, the mess comes about because there's something not properly defined. And
Yeah.
if I can figure out what that is, and then I've got a real question to ask, not tell me more or oh, what made you think of that, but I start probing as to what define for me what you mean by important
Yes.
term inserted here.
Right.
Um, and they may not know, but we have resources for definition, right?
Right.
We have often a text that's causing the initial statement, so maybe we go back to the text. We have dictionaries. God help us. We have Google, Siri, Alexa.
Sure.
But and especially with philosophical things or really things that you really need to know, if you ask Alexa or Siri, they often go, I don't have an answer for
Right.
that.
Right. Yeah. Don't
They can
fail
tell
me
you
now.
who struck out in the third inning of the 1939 World Series, but they can't tell you anything about real terms that matter.
Right.
Um, uh, but no, I think that we've given quite a bit for people to think about. I don't know if any of it's been a bomb going off, but
I don't
we've already
know.
said that you can't necessarily make that happen.
Yeah.
But I would say that the biggest deal is having a nose for it,
Mm-hmm.
prayerfully expecting it.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the things that I've discovered. That is, if you start off, and I teach in a Christian context, I know some of our listeners may not, but if you have the ability to start a class off with God, with invoking His help,
Mm-hmm.
with with the silence that comes from prayer,
Right.
um, that's a good input. There's the door getting cracked.
Yep.
Hey, truth, if you want to come in, we're at least trying to have God at the head of this classroom.
Yeah.
But having a nose for it, having a desire for it, learning how to react when you hear, see, sense it, and then being thankful.
Mm.
I think my students know how much I appreciate a good moment that they bring.
Yeah.
I don't go over the top and jump up and down and run around and give them
Hang up
candy
banners.
bars and stuff like that.
Right.
Yeah, but there's a real sense this was a good this was a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate you bringing that into the classroom.
Yeah.
Um, so sometimes there in the back of that is a little head scratch. Well, Elliot, why didn't you think of that? But that's just me and my
Hey,
ego, and
sure.
it doesn't need to come out there to them. And it is amazing how it seems to be a shared burden.
Mm-hmm.
I rarely have the same person being the bomb setter.
Right.
It comes from often it comes most effectively from some of the most unexpected sources.
Yep.
When you're least expecting it, that seems to be when it goes off. So
That's
what
right.
I hate is when the bomb happens and the stupid administration decides to run a fire drill right then. Yeah,
Oh,
because then
yeah.
I want to go down to that office and say you can't do this right now.
Right.
Something really important has just happened.
Right. I'm
My
going to come to
class
your
is
house and start a fire
yeah
alarm at 3
yeah.
a.m., right?
My class is figuratively on fire at the moment, and you're trying to put it out. What are you doing?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh well. Oh well.
Well,
That's where homeschoolers just beat the sticks out of those of us that have to labor away in the factories of schools, right?
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We don't have to deal with those nasty fire drills.
That's right. Okay. Well, I don't know how to tie a bow on this one, but I do think it was a good conversation in sort of waiting for that, right? And learning how to look for it and find it and keep it. So, Steve, man, as
Maybe
always, thanks, man.
maybe to close this thing up, you ought to use a sound effect and just pull a fire alarm, and we'll end the podcast with
I do
that.
not know how to put sound effects on GarageBand. So that will not happen. Yeah, you'll have to
Okay.
make it. All right, dude. Until next
We'll
time.
catch you.
Yeah.